This is WTOP Ticket Buster Ariash, and what hopefully will be the final video in regards to the speed camera just west of Metzerott Road and the intersection of St. Andrew's Place, as we've been doing a number of stories on this. As you recall, we had a driver named John Bressler who received a speed camera ticket on the 3300 block of Metzerott Road just west, about 250 yards west of the location I'm currently at. And we identified in a story in which we broadcast on August 16th an issue with the speed limits in this area. As you saw in our first video, Mr. Bressler got a ticket from a speed camera that was just 40 yards away from a 40-mile-an-hour sign, although that camera is enforcing 30 miles an hour. So even though they were still in those final yards, final feet of a 30-mile-an-hour zone, they could see the 40 sign, and in fact, on Mr. Bressler's ticket itself, you could see the 40-mile-an-hour sign. So a lot of drivers came to us reacting to the story, saying, yes, this is very confusing, and this is something we've known about. And a week later, on August 23rd, we got notice from the City of College Park that as part of the WTOP investigation, they would in fact move the camera farther east to satisfy the concerns. So we'll take a look where the camera is in a couple minutes. And they haven't very much solved that problem. They have. They've done a good job. Very good job of making sure it's no longer confusing. So I'm going to turn around here to the right first. And as you'll see, cars headed away from the camera right now are headed west on Metzerott Road. Cars headed towards our camera, and I don't see any right now, although there are some now coming. Those cars are headed east on Metzerott Road. So the issue was for these drivers headed west, although there were people headed east that were telling us that there were problems. So as you see over here on the right, there's a sign that says speed limit 30 miles an hour, photo enforced. As you'll remember from the original video, there was a speed camera about 250 yards from where I'm currently standing, about 200 yards away from the speed limit 30 mile an hour sign, in the westbound lanes and some green space just to the right of these utility poles down the road. And the speed camera was just 40 yards from a 40 mile an hour sign that's about 7 or 8 poles down there, probably down where at the end of the screen you see that car headed east towards us. So the issue was that the speed camera was about 160 yards from that 30 mile an hour sign and only 40 yards from a 40 mile an hour sign. So after our investigation a week later on August 23rd, they said, all right, we understand to some drivers it can be confusing, so we're going to move the camera. So I'm going to pan over to the left here and show you where they moved the camera. So now we're going to walk actually east. As you see, again, this is the intersection of St. Andrew's Place and Metzerott Road. We're now headed east away from the 40 mile an hour sign. And as you can see, there's the camera, and we'll walk a little bit closer just to give you a look at it in a second. So we're crossing the intersection right now of St. Andrew's Place and Metzerott Road. As you remember from the first video, everything was happening west of this intersection. Now these cameras are placed at the intersection, which actually does very much solve this issue. So as you can see right here, this is a speed camera enforcing 30 miles an hour going west on Metzerott Road. Again, and I'm going to turn around here. That's the intersection, although you may have trouble seeing it because of the sun. But this is the intersection of Metzerott and St. Andrew's Place. And this is enforcing the westbound direction. Now this is not an issue anymore because although you can't see it on the video, as you go down towards those cars headed west, there are a whole bunch of signs down that way saying 30 miles an hour. So establishing 30 miles an hour really shouldn't be an issue for people headed westbound or frankly headed eastbound as they approach this camera. There are no conflicting signs east of our direction for down the road there for people headed west. Basically, as you see down the road here, they're all 30-mile-an-hour signs. So this camera is very much enforcing a well-known speed limit of 30 miles an hour. And as we get room here, I'll show you the camera which is on the other side of the road. We'll take a walk over there, you can see it. But drivers at this point probably need to know what they have to do. They have to drive the speed limit, which is 30 miles an hour, as you see down there. And there are a whole bunch of signs again behind the camera now, or east on Metzerott Road, down in this direction. In fact, you probably can see one on the eastbound lanes, perhaps down by that crossing sign, that neon yellow crossing sign. Whole bunch of 30-mile-an-hour signs. So again, the city of College Park has done a good job at least addressing the speed limit issue. And now I'm crossing the street here again. We're at the intersection of St. Andrew's Place and Metzerott Road. This is for drivers headed in the eastbound direction. So that bus that's headed towards us is headed east on Metzerott Road. And again, this camera is now in the intersection. It's enforcing 30 miles an hour. As you see on the right-hand side, a 30-mile-an-hour sign for drivers headed west on Metzerott Road. By that camera, which is probably, from my current location, about 350 yards away, 300 yards away, by that 40-mile-an-hour sign, people headed towards this camera right now, which again is headed east on Metzerott Road, have a 30-mile-an-hour sign. That was one of the issues we identified, that when there's a 40-mile-an-hour sign and then you turn around on the other side of the road, there's a 30-mile-an-hour sign, what's going on? And certainly the issue was that the driver, that's the dividing line between the city of College Park and the county, Adelphi being the next town over, but that being county property. That's why the speed limit went up to 40 as you're headed west out of town, and down to 30 east on Metzerott Road, as east again being the vehicles headed towards this camera right now, headed into the city of College Park. So that 30-mile-an-hour sign in the eastbound direction is a good 350 yards down the road in the direction this camera's pointing. So the speed camera that's enforcing east, very much, again, like the other camera enforcing westbound traffic, has a well-established 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. Really, the only other issue that's left to discuss on this, and one that AAA Mid-Atlantic's brought up, that the Maryland Drivers Alliance has brought up, one that maybe the General Assembly, as I've heard, may bring up in the upcoming session next year, is the issue of the institutes of higher education. So this camera here, again, intersection of St. Andrew's Place and Metzerott Road, and the one across the street over there enforcing at the same intersection westbound traffic on Metzerott Road. Both of these cameras here are now probably about a mile and a quarter at most, more likely a mile, from the westernmost point of the campus of the University of Maryland. The theory behind the law, which is that in Prince George's County, mainly pretty much all College Park, this was a College Park proposal that now Senator Rosa Pepe got into the speed camera law several years ago, was that you can put speed cameras near institutes of higher education, so colleges, universities, basically where you'd go after you graduate high school. And the issue became, well, there are no real students headed down this road on Metzerott because the campus is a mile away and you're supposed to be within a half a mile of an institute of higher education. The issue is multifold. The building down where the old camera was located was near a building, as you saw in the last video, called the Elkins Building, which is the Board of Regents building, an administrative building without students. Across the street, on the eastbound side, when we panned in that video, there was the University of Maryland Observatory, which only occasionally holds classes and is only occasionally open to the public as well. Not a place where daily traffic, daily classes, and daily student traffic goes. The City of College Park feels it's well within the letter of the law. Their statement is both the two buildings we just mentioned and the courtyards at University of Maryland, which is not owned by the university, but nonetheless a popular, as they claim, off-campus housing complex all qualify as institutes of higher education. The courtyards, the University of Maryland is in this direction, so this is east about maybe 7 to 8 tenths of a mile headed east in the direction we're looking at right now, and pan back over. So the city says in a number of ways we're meeting the letter of the law, and in fact the letter of the law doesn't say anything specifically about classrooms or students or protecting buildings and properties where daily classes are held by students during an academic year. Now, I don't think anyone really could argue that was the intent of the law, but a number of sources have agreed that the law is somewhat vague, and perhaps they are honoring the letter of the law, but the intent maybe not so much. So again, this is an issue, probably one that will be addressed in Annapolis in the upcoming year. One we're not going to specifically address with the WTOP ticket buster, but one that AAA Mid-Atlantic, John Townsend and Lon Anderson, and the Maryland Drivers Alliance and Ron Ely have been very much on top of, and an issue I do think will be discussed in Annapolis come early 2014. But again, they've moved the speed cameras here to the intersection of St. Andrew's Place and Metzerott Road, and very much have solved the issues of the confusing speed limit signs. And we'll find out what ends up happening to John Bressler's ticket and whether or not it gets dismissed, given the fact that they've acknowledged the camera location wasn't the best and did confuse some drivers.